my name is Leslie Rose. I am the community programs coordinator with the Sandy Spring Museum. I'm glad all of you could make it here tonight. Before we begin, I'm going to read the museum's statement. So the Sandy Spring Museum is committed to working towards dismantling systemic issues that impact marginalized communities in our society. We acknowledge that the United States was built on discriminatory practices that were codified in our legal system, beginning with the dehumanization of Native peoples, followed by enslaving Black people in bondage as property for the financial benefit of those of white European ancestry. Sandy Spring Museum stands on land that was once a plantation where Black people were enslaved. We recognize that the museum is the beneficiary of a historically unjust system. It is critical that museums are part of the conversation in their communities to address these historical and current injustices. Across our programs, exhibitions, and collections, we are actively working to address this history, create community understanding, and build a more equitable future. As climate change is an issue that disproportionately affects Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, tonight's program is one of many that continues these efforts. Welcome to this month's History Happy Hour, Faith and Fossil Fuels, the Legacy of Fossil Fuels and Choosing a Better Future. So we have two speakers for tonight. We have Rebecca Leber. Rebecca Leber is a senior reporter covering climate change for Vox. Before joining Vox, she was an environmental reporter at Mother Jones, where her investigations exposed government corruption and fossil fuel industry disinformation. She has worked as a staff writer for Grist, The New Republic, and Think Progress. A dozen more outlets have published her work over a decade as a climate journalist. She lives in Washington, D.C. So we're grateful to have you here today, Rebecca. We also have Joelle Nubby. So Joelle Nubby is the director of Interfaith Power and Light, which covers D.C., Maryland, and Northern Virginia, which works with hundreds of congregations of many traditions across Maryland, as I said, and the surrounding areas, to save energy, go green, and respond to climate change, and speak and Joelle speaks widely to the role that faith communities can play in the climate movement. She lives with her family in the Eastern Village in Silver Spring. So thank you both for joining us. Later this evening, we will have Cindy McCabe from the Montgomery County Green Bank, who will share more about alternative energies instead of fossil fuels. But before I let Rebecca start to tell us more about the history of fossil fuels and how they play a role in our everyday lives, I'm going to share some interesting things from our collection that relate to today's topics. All right, so this first slide is showing us some minutes from a community meeting way back in 1945. And so the topic of this meeting was about the history of Montgomery County. And the speaker really divided the history of Montgomery County in 5 different stages. So the first stage was divided into the stage of tobacco growth. But one of the notable things that they talked about was tobacco was across the United States and in this area, it was a heavily farmed crop and it was really used for things like currency. And so everyone was growing it. But the problem was that it actually depleted the soil of its natural nutrients. And so the Quakers, when they moved into the area, they actually replenished the soil by introducing guano. So this is a historic way that people in this area have sort of practiced sustainable farming. I have another. So these are actually a part of a salesman kit, available types of guano. And so this is from 1840. And so a salesman would go around and ask people like, oh, you need to replenish your soil, the nutrients in there. What can help? Guano. And so a lot of people, don't make the connection that guano is a natural fertilizer, but it's something that's been happening in the Sandy Spring area for a long time. And so this is now on display at the museum. But yeah, a very interesting way that people are practicing sustainability. And then I have one more little tidbit. So this is actually very relevant to our conversation about fossil fuels and natural gas. And so as I was digging through our archival collection, I found these minutes from another community meeting from 1918. And so the question for the evening was on the fireless cooker. And is it a practical adjunct to the farm kitchen? And so the two presenters actually had never used a fireless cooker. They were informed about its processes via articles and via friends, but they had heard that the fireless cooker was an absolute charm or a necessity to small families living in apartments, but to the farm kitchen, it was really just, something nice to have in case of an emergency. But I bring this in because I thought it was very interesting the way that people are finding out about the best, cooking processes, the best things to use from, articles or from friends. And so it made me think a lot about the work that Rebecca has done in terms of how sort of fossil fuels and natural gas have been communicated to the masses. And so I wanted to open up and start there, if that works for Rebecca, or, if you wanted to come back to this question later. I thought that this is a very relevant question to the things that people have been asking for decades. So I'll leave it off. I'll stop sharing and leave it to Rebecca to start.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here. Yeah, this talk is kind of at the intersection I've been really interested in reporting on the last few years, and that is looking at some of our assumptions about how integrated fossil fuels are in our lives, and questioning, I guess, the whether that has to be inevitable. I think at a really broad level, there are economic forces and political forces that have made it seem like the gas stove in your kitchen or the gas pipelines that power and heat our homes are inevitable, when we know, based on the climate science, that has to rapidly change in the coming decades. So I guess to kick things off, I wanted to take through a few examples from my reporting, actually specifically on the natural gas industry and gas stoves, because I think this is a really clear example of how the public has been fed misleading information or one side of the story for actually centuries, and how baked in these myths are into our decisions and political decisions around what to do around climate change. So I, to give a little bit of background on my interest in the natural gas industry, at the beginning of the pandemic, I was looking at how to cover the climate beat while we are seeing this other catastrophe unfold in real time, and actually ended up kind of stumbling through a tip onto this entire world of social media influencers who were being paid by the natural gas industry to promote gas stoves. So this was this world I didn't even realize existed of fossil fuel influencers, and kind of a 21st century version of the advertising that the fossil fuel industry has been using for centuries now. So I will share my screen in a minute to give a few examples, but basically through those the gas stove influencers, I started asking questions about why would the natural gas industry be working this hard to promote the gas stove? They have to have an incentive here to make sure that the gas stove has this pristine reputation for Americans. So let's see, let me do a quick thing to share my screen. Let's see, can people see anything yet? Okay, great. So if I'm doing this correctly, this is actually the first story I did on the subject, how the gas industry was hiring gas influencers on Instagram. But just to look at a couple examples, these were young and pretty diverse set of women that had been paid by the gas industry to basically post for their followers and audience how great the gas stove was. So a lot of these are pictures of women kind of posing with their spatula and their stove. So this was on its face kind of strange to me. And I'm just scrolling down for one more example of a woman smelling her spatula. So there was a lot of variety here. So I started asking the question why the industry would be doing this, and ended up stumbling onto this century-long campaign by the gas industry to embed this mythology in our everyday lives that the gas stove is the only way to cook. So to give another example of how this was done, this might actually be my favorite, is this wrap that a gas company sponsored in the 80s. So I'll just play a clip from this.
Gas. Cooking with gas.
Cooking with gas.
We all cook better when we're cooking with gas.
Gas is so hot it's not on when it's off. It's the only way to cook. That's what I was taught. Now here's a fact you should have to know to pass. 9 out of 10 chefs only cook with gas. Why is that, you say? Can I cook my way? The benefits we have to tell will really make your day. So listen, class, because we're gonna go fast. Here are all the reasons you should cook with gas.
Okay, that's probably enough, but it gives you the idea. That was one example that showed me that this campaign was going on a lot longer than Instagram has existed. There were a couple other examples just to quickly go through. These were, sorry, this is a little bit hard to read, but a series of ads in newspapers through the 1950s and 60s promoting cooking with gas using celebrities. So this one shows Marlene Dietrich kind of doing the 1960s version of the Instagram influencer of cooking at her home and promoting how great gas is. So why is this important? Why should we care? Right now, the country has to transition to clean electricity, and including electricity that powers our homes. It has to make that transition within the next decade if we have any hope of meeting global climate targets. The problem is a good portion of the country is powered by gas. We have lots of homes, especially in populous cities, that are powered by natural gas. The gas stove is kind of the clearest entry point for your kind of the American consumer of understanding how gas is connected to their home. So we have seen this proliferation of campaigns from the gas industry to fight off climate battles that try to promote clean energy policies and to promote electrification because they want to protect their bottom line. They're using the gas stove as that tool to drive a wedge here to prevent cities and states from taking further action. And one of the ways they're doing that is by hiring kind of the people you would trust, like someone you follow on social media, to generate public opposition to these climate efforts. So this is a really specific example of a fight that has much larger implications for climate change. You can kind of see versions of this playing out throughout climate policy in America and throughout the gas industry right now. To name a couple other examples, right now there is this major fight playing out over whether you can call natural gas responsibly sourced or not. There are gas companies that are claiming that their gas is cleaner than the other guy's gas. But at the same time, this is all pure methane. So I think, let's see, I wanted, I feel like I'm talking a while. I usually like questions if anyone has any, but the other thing I would raise about the gas industry is how these kinds of marketing campaigns, how effective they have been in shaping how we view natural gas. And I think that is embedded in the actual name, natural gas. When you start to look at why we call this fuel natural in the first place, that's actually a story I'm working on at the very moment of looking at the history there. And it's really fascinating how the industry has leaned into that phrase natural gas and all that's implied with that this is supposedly a clean source, that it is a healthy source for fuel. So natural gas in itself, the very name, actually biases a lot of people into thinking this is a cleaner source than it really is, because what it is at the end of the day is almost pure methane. Methane is a climate pollutant. It is actually more powerful than the most common climate pollutant out there, carbon dioxide, because methane actually traps heat more effectively, 80 times more effectively over a shorter period. Methane is rising in the atmosphere, so that is why looking at gas in our society is such a big problem to address looking ahead, and why current debates over whether this is really a transition fuel away from coal or really part of our climate solutions, why that is so prevalent right now, why that's such an important debate to have. The one other thing I'll say about methane, and then I will pass this along, is methane is also an air pollutant. It is actually unique in terms of not just being a climate pollutant, but also contributing to poor air quality. Methane contributes to levels of ozone, which is basically smog. Smog kills millions of people around the world every year. And the way methane interacts with other atmospheric chemicals, it basically adds to the ozone that's in the atmosphere, and not the good kind that protects us from the sun, but the kind that clogs our lungs close to the ground. So there's a lot at stake with the natural gas industry beyond these kinds of cutesy social media ads that we may see, or these claims to being a responsible source. That this has, there are a lot of lives at stake in taking a harder look at gas, and that this is also key if we're going to tackle climate change. And oh yeah, so I got a question, a DM question here, but about burning gas in your house. So I did miss one other really huge detail here that's very important when it comes to gas stoves and appliances. Gas burned in your home when you turn on the stove emits a host of pollutants that are proven to be very harmful. The most worrisome is nitrogen dioxide, and there's also particulate matter, and we also all know about the carbon monoxide risk of having gas in the home. This is kind of an issue where the science has gone a lot stronger over just the last few years, showing us the links to indoor gas appliances and how that harms human health. The scientific community actually just has less data on indoor air pollution than when you look. So most people don't have the kind of ventilation that would help with dispersing these kinds of pollutants from your stove. If you have a range hood, which basically sucks up the air and vents it outside, that's considered the best version of ventilation that you can have, restaurant grade kind of quality. But most people don't have this. They have either a fan that recirculates the air in their home, or they don't have anything at all. So there's also an environmental justice concern here, because the people who have the least control over ventilation in their home, who are more likely to live in cramped spaces, and to be exposed to more pollution here are people who are living in poverty or people of color. There's research that backs this up, and I'm happy to share some links to my reporting on this. But gas is a really multifaceted issue that has a lot at stake for environmental justice, for climate change, and your personal health.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. I think that your work, it has definitely changed the way I think about my own gas stove. I actually, when I came home today, I smelled gas in the air and realized that it was, going. And I realized like this is actually, a danger in my home. And it's interesting to think that there are, while I think it's like the best cooking method, that's actually just something that the fossil fuel industry has told us. So that I learned thanks to you. But one of the things that I really like about your work and Joelle's work is the fact that you're taking the conversation about climate change from a really macro level, where a lot of people feel like it's out of their control. It's sort of not something that they can do. It's larger companies, it's things like that. But you're really talking about the natural gas that's in your home, that the way that it's affecting you on an everyday level. And I really think that Joelle is also doing something similar in terms of like, this is a conversation that can be had on a macro level, but on a micro level in terms of thinking about your home and your community. And so I wanted to sort of transition to Joelle to talk more about your work. And then I sort of have a question for the two of you that sort of connect both of your research, or your work. So I'll let Joelle take it over first.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having me. And I've also been like really educated by your work, Rebecca. So thank you for teaching me. And now I'm doing my best to spread the word. So yeah, our work at Interfaith Power and Light is to work with congregations of all faith traditions across our region to support them in responding to climate change as a moral and religious issue. And we do that work as one of about 40 state affiliates of Interfaith Power and Light doing similar work around the country. We believe that congregations and faith communities are some of the most powerful places in the world to talk about climate change. And we believe that, I've been at this for 12 years. We, as Rebecca said, every sector of our society, every place where, everything will be affected by climate change. Every part of our society needs to respond and, sort of join in the work of shifting away from fossil fuels. But I've come to believe that there's unique power in doing that work in faith communities and congregations, and that everyone who has a stake in the climate fight should be glad that this work is going on in congregations, regardless of whether you personally, have a congregation in your life right now or have any use for faith communities personally. I guess the first one is that when we talk about climate change in congregations, people listen differently. So the climate fight has become extraordinarily politicized. And when we talk about climate change in, in a place where people listen differently, they listen with their moral ears, and they think about right and wrong and doing right by our neighbors, doing right by the natural world, then they I don't have to say I am reframing climate change as a moral issue, but it is a moral issue, right? They hear it as a matter of right and wrong, doing right by our neighbors, doing right by the natural world. This is what I'm doing that's impacting others, and I need to take stock and change course. And then when we speak out from that place, from that grounded moral place on climate issues, we are heard differently. I see so often that we are able to help elevate the larger climate movement as a moral issue, as a matter of right and wrong, because of bringing faith voices to that work. So many of the themes of what Rebecca described are about, things that might have seemed like normal everyday life. They are invisible to us because they've become just part of the wallpaper. But in fact, they are things we are doing that are causing harm. There are things that we're doing that are causing harm to the kids who live in our own homes and are breathing that air. They're doing harm, you know, at the origin when fracking, for natural gas, like, destroys people's home places and pollutes water. They are doing harm when we cause global irrevocable climate change by pouring heat trapping climate pollution into the atmosphere. So I think Leslie wanted to ask us a question together before I get into the rest of my talk, but we have an opportunity to help people see that this is like the quintessential moral issue, and that anyone who cares about doing right by other people needs to reckon with their complicity in the climate crisis.
Thank you for just talking more about your perspective and how you come at this issue from a religious standpoint. One of the interesting things that I saw reading more of Rebecca's work and thinking about your work, Joelle, is just the idea, Rebecca, you write a lot about how some politicians use religion as a way to, justify ignoring climate change or saying that it's not actually happening. And so I saw this very interesting thing happening where, like, politicians are saying one thing, but then, Joelle, your work is really like, no, like, the tenets of different faiths are all talking about taking care of one another, taking care of the earth. And so I kind of wanted to hear the two different sides. So that's my question.
Joelle, I loved how you put that people are listening with their moral ears. And I think that captures that there is, I think, different ways faith is linked to the climate battles. It has faith communities have played a really crucial fight and crucial role in the advocacy of this issue. I've reported on this, talked to people like you who do this important work. But I think there are ways that some politicians have kind of used religion as a tool or an excuse for why we shouldn't act on climate. And I think this gets more concrete with a few examples. Back in the Trump administration, his first EPA administrator was Scott Pruitt, and he is he's an evangelical Christian. I actually went on a reporting trip where I talked to his pastor at a mega church in Oklahoma. And I came away with a deeper understanding of a few things of where kind of faith can be also used as an excuse for climate denial. So Scott Pruitt rejected climate science, was key to deregulating environmental protection under Trump. And he actually would actively link or justify those acts by using a very specific interpretation of the Bible. I am far from an expert on this, but he and there have been other politicians who do this would point to certain kind of interpretations saying that this is actually a sign that man has dominion over the land, meaning rather than having a responsibility for stewardship of that land, which I believe is Pope Francis's view of this, that people need to be stewards here. Scott Pruitt's version of this was that this gave people a mandate to exploit the fossil fuel we have, because this is a God-given gift. So I think there's really subtle ways we see all this come about. So I'm trying not to conflate any of this, but I do think we see for climate deniers in Congress and in the government, kind of using faith as a crutch for why we shouldn't act, or using kind of this falling back on saying that because fossil fuels exist, that means God wants us to exploit this no matter the harm. that it causes. So I'll let Joelle talk about the more positive side of this.
Yeah, I really appreciate, raising those examples. And, in addition to the arguments you describe where people say, the Bible proves that these resources were given to man to do whatever, humanity to do whatever we pleased. I've also heard, members of Congress say, well, didn't God promise Noah that he would never, that they would never destroy the world again? So obviously this couldn't be happening. And before I, respond to that directly, I want to just have some empathy for how unsettling climate science is to everyone, and how much it upends our own understanding of how we were raised to believe the universe worked. Like, I do believe that understanding the climate crisis, when you really look at it head on, is a challenge to all of our theologies writ large, by which I mean whatever your understanding is of how human beings fit into the universe and have a role in the world. If you understand the climate crisis and climate science and its implications, you are going to feel disoriented and unmoored from whatever that understanding was. Those of us who are trying to grapple with climate science in ancient religious traditions, maybe look back to certain stories. We're like, well, maybe the one that is often cited is Noah and the flood. But if you read that story, it's so clear that our ancestors could not imagine a world in which anybody but God could mess with the weather, right? The weather is God's domain, and human beings, might be punished or rewarded by that weather. But a world in which human beings and our heat trapping pollution is the driving force behind our Earth's climate was unimagined by any of our traditions. And so we are lonely and out beyond a world that our forebears could have really imagined. So bringing our faith traditions to this moment, I believe, is a very important and fruitful. And I do think our traditions have teachings and wisdom for this moment. But I think I do think, who knows how many of these politicians are citing these faith scriptures in good faith, so to speak, or how many of them are, serving corporate interests ultimately. But I have a lot of compassion for how many people really do find their theologies challenged and themselves deeply disoriented by the climate crisis. I mean, for me, growing up in Jewish communities, the message was always about the meaning. So much meaning comes from being part of a continuous transmission, that we inherit this ancient tradition from the prior generation, and we will pass it on into the future. And there's a kind of continuity. We just celebrated the Jewish holiday of Tu B'Shvat, which always came at the time of the first blossom festivals, the first blossoms the first almond blossoms in the land of Israel. And on the lunar calendar, that holiday came around at first blossom times for hundreds and thousands of years. And now, we've moved first blossom times several weeks earlier all over the Northern Hemisphere because of the climate crisis, because we've damaged the climate. And how I want to just honor how spiritually unsettling that, that what is happening and really grappling with climate science is deeply lonely and unsettling for people, and we want to acknowledge and honor those feelings. That said, I think congregations and faith communities bring tremendous resources to the question of, to answering these questions and beginning to grapple with them. I have been opening climate conversations in faith communities almost every weekend for 12 years now. And I sometimes joke that at least before the pandemic, people asked me to bring pictures of our work, or grant reports or whatever. And it was all just circles of people sitting in folding chairs in fellowship halls and church basements. They all look there are different kinds of people, but they all look like they're all the same picture, because over and over again, we're just sitting with folks, talking about what's happening to our world and inviting them to think about how they are called to respond and reckoning with it in community. I've learned a few things about successfully opening climate conversations I would share with anyone. I think it's so important that we have those conversations, that we strengthen the muscles we use to talk about this issue. First of all, to remember that nobody has to become somebody else to care about climate change. You only are called to be more fully who you are. So whatever you love, whatever your deepest values are, think about what the things you love, how the things you love are endangered by climate change. And I get this line of thinking from my teacher, Dr. Catherine Hayhoe. Think about what your strongest moral convictions are and whether the way you are complicit participating in the climate crisis expresses those values, or whether you could more fully express those values. So we, and the other thing I think we have an extraordinary opportunity to do in congregations and in the communities where we celebrate and grieve is just to have some space for those feelings, right? To really let people process, the tremendous grief and rage and sorrow that that we feel when we think directly and talk directly about what is happening to our world and how much is being lost. And no matter what we do now, how much is being lost. And we also feel a lot of rage. Like, it was fun to watch those videos, Rebecca, but when I think about the way we've really been hoodwinked by an industry for their own profit into destroying the only world that our human beings have ever known, it's enraging, right? It's enraging. And it's, and all of the people who made that commercial, all the people who paid those influencers are also human beings who live on Earth and presumably expect their children to be able to live on Earth. And yet they put their humanity aside to serve this very destructive role. So I want to just, I know we're gonna, after I speak, Cindy my colleague Cindy McCabe from the Montgomery County Green Bank is going to talk about some of the ways people are can choose clean energy in their lives and in their congregations. But to speak, a little bit to, so what do we do about gas and all of the ways fossil fuels are so embedded in our lives? We've sort of kicked off a year of that. The theme of our year is turning away from burning. # turning away from burning. So we just are inviting everyone to imagine a world in which we don't have to burn anything to live. We don't have to destroy our world to live. And, we're calling it turning because you have to turn gradually. You can't, if something is embedded in your life and part of your oven, you can't, and part of your house, you can't quickly, change it completely, but you can begin to turn away in your thinking, in your choices, in communally, and then in what we're supporting and public policy. So we invite everyone to set their sights on a world in which we've electrified everything, that the grid on which that electric world is based is cleaner and cleaner as we ramp up solar and wind and truly renewable clean energy. And meanwhile, we are, really eliminating all fossil fuels. There are no fossil fuels that are natural. They're all bad for the climate. They're all bad for our health. And certainly we shouldn't be burning any fossil fuels in our own homes. The idea that there was fossil fuel combustion going on in my kitchen, somehow, I've been a climate activist for a dozen years, and I had never really focused on the fact that I've spent all this time trying to get the coal-fired power plants to shut down and get the offshore wind in Maryland to happen. And I never really thought until the last year or two of oh, I'm burning fossil fuels in my kitchen every night and my kids are breathing that air. That can't be the future that we're choosing, and it can't be the future I participate in. So in addition to the ways we can turn away from fossil fuels at home and turn away from burning in our communities, both of which Cindy will address, I also just want to share some of the ways we are joining with caring folks across Maryland to speak out for stronger policy that's going to move us in this direction as a state. And so we are part with a number of other groups of having put together something called the Maryland Climate Platform, which is a kind of big climate package that we're bringing to Annapolis this legislative session, and it includes a healthy buildings component that my organization, Interfaith Power and Light, is going to really focus on. That has two components. One is about new construction. So it shouldn't be a hard call that at least when you're building a new building, now that we know as much as we do about the dangers of gas, that we're at least calling for all electric new construction in Maryland. You know, sometimes things get tough in the legislative session and you have to compromise, but we're starting out with a call for 100% electric new construction, that we don't have any new gas hookups in the state of Maryland. And then the second component of that is about existing buildings, that at least the largest buildings would have a very strict building energy performance standard. This is something we already have in DC that's starting to go into effect, that would ramp down each year, getting us to net zero by 2040. So at the end of all of our comments, there'll be an opportunity to get connected to our work and join us in that effort, both in your home and in speaking out. I'll just share something that's keeping me kind of encouraged in this moment, because, you know, it is very disorienting to be in this world where we have to imagine things being really different, and things that seem really normal and unremarkable, like how we cook dinner, you know, suddenly is going to have to look different in the future. And, you know, this idea of turning away from burning is like, you know, might be a vision of just like leaving behind everything that's familiar to a totally strange new world. But in the Jewish tradition, the word for repentance is teshuvah, which literally means returning. So when we decide to like leave the wrong path and go back to the right path, the image is not of like going away, but of returning to who we really are meant to be and who we really are. And so I'm trying to hold fast to this vision that maybe turning away from fossil fuels likewise can be a return to who we're meant to be, how we're supposed to be together, how we're supposed to coexist with each other and with our natural world, that maybe this is a returning and not just a departure. And I'll leave it there for now.
I think that's really beautiful, Joelle. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you so much for sharing more about your organization. I want to, you know, give time before Cindy comes in and we talk about, you know, actionable ways that we can, you know, make a difference here. I want to give people a chance to ask our speakers questions. I know I have some for both of you, but I also want to give people a chance to ask questions on what they've heard today. And you can feel free to put it in the chat or on mute. I can get started and just ask Joelle about the interfaith angle and what are some of the really great things that's come about in sort of working with these different faith communities, or if there are any challenges with sort of going from different groups, or if you're not of that same faith, how does that work for you and your organization, excuse me.
Yeah, so I think, you know, I often think of ourselves as like, I don't know, there's this image in the Bible of Jacob who wrestled, this angel like came upon him and he didn't, and like started fighting with him and wrestled and then like, it really like, who is that? Why did this happen?
Joelle, I think you're cutting out. I think you cut
like,
out.
I'm not going to let you go.
Bit.
He's not going to let his assailant go. And
sorry to interrupt. I think I'm having a bit of connection issues with Joelle, but I'm going to let you speak and hopefully the connection clears up.
She looks frozen right now, unfortunately. Oh, no, you're back.
Okay. Am I back?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Sorry. I was going to say Jacob lets his assailant go, but he says, I will not let you go unless you bless me. That he insists on wresting a blessing. And that's kind of my vision of the climate crisis. We did not choose this fight. We're suddenly in the fight of our lives. We did not, you know, we were attacked and didn't ask for this, but we can kind of insist that it blesses us. And I think one of those blessings is the opportunity to come together across difference, right? And say, you know, maybe the things that kept us in separate before aren't that important if all human beings are facing a common threat to our home that we share. So I do feel like climate work is a powerful invitation to get over get over our differences and see value in in what every gift, everything people are bringing to the table. And I would just also offer anyone who's feeling lonely, like I think the climate work can make you feel really alone, and just to know like people of all faith traditions all over this region. I mean, certainly just even in Montgomery County, like so many, just recently Barbara Briggs, who's an awesome gas activist in DC at the Friends meeting of Washington, brought her gas sniffer equipment to the Sikh Gurdwara in Potomac and help the kids like sniff for gas leaks around their property and like talk with them about gas, and like all these beautiful connections that are coming together because actually so many people are heartsick about what's happening to our climate and want to are called to be protectors and repairers.
Yes, Allison asked in the chat, she says that I understand that one of the tenets of Quakerism is stewardship. Do other religions have the idea of stewardship as a part of their faith? So if you guys have an answer to that question, that would be great. But if other people in the audience have, an answer to this question too, feel free to share. Well,
I'll say this idea of dominion so that's mostly a fight about translation from Hebrew. So, there's something in Genesis, God put up the first person in the garden to ovda ulashom ra, to work it and to guard it, and put human beings in some kind of special role over the earth. And the question of what that special role is and what the word that's translated as dominion means, or steward, or it's like the conversation we're inside of to this day, right? Like what are human beings? Like we're clearly different from a lot of the other animals. What is our role? What is right living in this world? I mean, I think that is the question, but it's a question that all of our traditions have grappled with in different ways and offer us teachings, I think, in this moment.
Yeah, just to briefly add, years ago, when Pope Francis issued his encyclical on climate change, that concept was really the strong theme of being good stewards, and the responsibility to protect a livable planet for current and future generations. I think that I am not a religion expert or reporter, but I think messages like that from religious leaders and like Joelle said, kind of the reaching people in different ways when like in congregation, it can have really powerful effect beyond even just beyond if you're a Catholic or beyond if you are Jewish. That I think that the encyclical from Pope Francis didn't do what we kind of had hoped, which would have been convince some powerful climate deniers who happen to be Catholic in Congress. It did not sway them because they are swayed by other political and economic interests. But I think the past decade, we have seen this more subtle shift in how voters view this, in how Latin American countries, how climate change polls. I think there are a lot more subtle effects here.
To me, it's not, I don't want us to feel like we have to prove based on proof texts or prove based on some other leader's pronouncement what a true way to live out our faith with respect, or a particular tradition with respect to the climate crisis is. Like we are answering that question. Like if climate change matters to you, talk with the people in your community about why it matters to you. Talk about your own values and why in your own heart you feel called to respond to this as a moral question. I mean, we are not arguing just rhetorically for the idea that the faithful way to live out, our traditions is to repair the climate. We are actually like being it. We are just showing, like, and honestly, I think a lot of people, it was striking to me that even in one of the most hierarchical religions, the Pope saying, unequivocally that we are called to address the climate crisis and address it politically, like address it in policy, still did not transform things on the ground without a lot of conversations among real people. But I have come to see over and over again that people are very responsive to what the people in their own communities are doing. People are very responsive to what their friends and the people they respect are worried about and are thinking about. So if this is important to you and it's important to you in your faith community, find those voices that are making the case, right? There are groups of like Latter-day Saints that are working on like a stewardship, theology internal to that tradition. There's an eco-sick group. There's a Buddhist climate group. There's a Jewish, lots and lots of Jewish climate groups now. So whatever faith tradition you're in, there are folks who are making that case and arguing that this is the true expression of the faith in this time, and you can be part of that.
Great, thank you both for those responses. We have a question from Haley Krim. Haley asks, do you see a way to appeal to politicians from the local to the national level to get them to implement decarbonization and climate justice strategies? Great question.
Happy to kick that off and then turn that over to Joelle, but I think at a national level, things are hard to influence. There's a lot of levers going on. So I always encourage, if you're thinking about getting more involved, to maybe start with local groups and start with what is being done on the ground in your community, your city, or even state. I think we're seeing this shift actually even among Republicans, where clean energy is now this economic force that they have to contend with in their own states. So, and that has been, that shift has happened primarily because of organizing and because of cities adopting clean energy, that these industries have grown, where politicians, even climate change deniers in Congress, have to take notice. So we actually see a lot of clean energy projects happening in Republican states, which has created some more political opportunity at the national level to renew clean energy tax credits and to do bigger things. This isn't the breakthrough on climate that we want, but I think getting more clean energy in your community, pushing for or supporting an electrification campaign, those are happening across the country. We were talking about what's happening in Maryland and DC, but you can kind of find these fights in lots of cities, and supporting those efforts to try to electrify buildings. That's another really important entry point to make some change happen.
Yeah, I would just say we have to build a grassroots movement. That's how we influence politicians. And I would also say, for some reason, a lot of the folks that I interact with, their first assumption when I'm coming to talk about climate change is that I'm going to ask them to change their light bulbs or to make personal choices at home to solve the problem. And I always want them to know, no, we are part of a fossil fuel system, and that system is much bigger than us. And the real villains in that system are these corporate polluters that have been, lying to us and, damaging the climate much more than any one person's choices have been. And that the only way to, I think that advocacy not only is the most important way to take action. People ask Bill McKibben, what's the one thing I can do? And he's like, don't just be what's the one thing one person can do? And he's like, don't be just one person, join with others to do something at a larger scale. But I also think that's the only way to maintain a hopeful real hope, that this is a global problem that's so much bigger than any one of us. And unless we're part of movements that are also really large, much bigger than ourselves, we won't feel like we're getting close to the scale of the problem. So I guarantee there are, if you're part of a faith community, Interfaith Power and Light is a good way to connect, but there are so many extraordinary grassroots organizations working on climate, as you heard, at the county, state, and national levels right now. And any one of those where you're going to be in community with others and they're going to call you to action over and over again is the ticket.
There was a great headline. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No.
Just like an example of kind of both the symbolic and like real world stakes of what smart grassroots advocacy can do. During the Trump administration, DC adopted 100% clean energy target. And I'll be honest, I haven't looked at this lately, but I'm pretty sure that actually applied to federal buildings as well, or there was a bit of a skirmish over whether that ordinance would apply. But basically, it was incredible to see DC, because of a local campaign, ending up in a way forcing the White House, a climate denier White House, in having to reckon with that it would also have to transition to cleaner fuels. So I just love that example, because that fight, like a lot of those 100% clean energy fights happening around the country, did start with a couple of advocacy groups that then reached the council's ears, and it took off from there.
An example, I would say, of the local scale type of activism being really powerful specifically to the gas you described is that there have been a number of municipal level campaigns to ban new gas hookups in new construction. And in California, it's really picked a fight with the industry, and they've gone all out and gone to court. And, the industry's trying to get out ahead of it sometimes and passing these preemption laws that say you can't ban, gas in new construction. But, right now we're very focused on the Maryland legislative session. But, I think Montgomery County, some of the counties in Maryland would be really awesome places to try one of these municipal gas bans on new gas campaigns, because that's it's like picking a local fight and the county council is your target. But in fact, you're sort of poking the bear of this huge industry that is very determined not to see us turn away from gas.
Yeah, one other like huge success on that front was New York City also adopted a ban on gas in new buildings just before the new year. And that was also a homegrown activist campaign, but that is now snowballing into New York State considering the same. So the New York City is a behemoth. So it's maybe not the fairest parallel, but county and city action has then prompted state action. And actually that could, in the next couple of years, translate into more aggressive federal action in banning gas hookups.
Thank you both so much for those really rich answers to that question. I think it's really great to see how local things, as you guys said, impact national agendas and really make that change. But I think this is a great transition to introduce Cindy McCabe, since we're talking so locally, to think about Montgomery County Green Bank. And so if people have, we're going to listen to what Cindy does with the Green Bank, and then also if people have questions, you can hang on and ask Cindy or Rebecca or Joelle if you have yet to ask your question. So I'm going to hang it over to Cindy to tell us more about your work, and then if people have questions, they can hang on and ask. Yeah.
Thanks, Leslie. Hi, everyone. This is a hard act to follow here. Wonderful discussion you all have been having. I come from a place of activism before working for the Green Bank. I was definitely an environmental activist and did environmental work in the Peace Corps as well. I have a couple slides to go through to make sure I don't forget anything, if that's all right, Leslie. It looks like I can. Yep. It's okay with you? Okay, just I don't want to. Alrighty. Let me move this here. All right, this picture is from a presentation that Joelle put together for us. It's from the Adat Shalom Reconstructionist Congregation in Bethesda. So what is a green bank? We're a nonprofit. That's probably the most important thing, that we're not a county organization, but we were chartered by the county. So we can use our funds in specific ways. We are independent and we're governed by a board of directors, including some of the folks from the County Department of Environmental Protection. We're more of a fund than a bank. We don't take deposits. There's no ATMs or anything like that, but we do put our money into environmental projects only in Montgomery County. I won't go through all of this, but we've done some work with affordable housing, commercial buildings, residential solar, geothermal, energy upgrades, EV chargers, a great community solar project that helps low to moderate income folks, which I'll show you about at the end if you're interested in signing up. Especially helpful for folks that can't get solar where they live. You can still subscribe to a community solar project to get the benefits on your bill, and then some technical assistance for a couple different places. What can you do for energy efficiency and why should you do it? Making your home more efficient reduces the amount of electricity you need to use in the first place. People say the cheapest kilowatt of electricity is the one that you don't use. So you can make your house more comfortable, even the temperature a bit, improve the indoor air quality, which you all were just talking about. Some actual projects include reducing the amount of air that leaks in the house. That's what the picture is there. The person's using a thermal device to see where the cool and the hot air are changing place in the house. You can put insulation, mostly that's up in the roof. You can seal the air movement, put in higher efficiency appliances, HVAC, improve the ceiling of your home so that the air doesn't go out once you've conditioned it. And of course, improve your lighting to the LED lighting. We've got a program where we help you finance it. So you can say this is all in good, but if you don't have the funds, you can turn to us and ask us about it. I've got a little bit here about our terms and things. We don't provide the loans ourselves. So like I said, we're a fund. We work with the Clean Energy Credit Union to get you a better deal. And we have a current promotion, where you don't pay any interest for 12 months. So if you want to know more about it, let me know. This picture here is blow-in insulation in the attic to keep the conditioned air from escaping. We also have a program for solar and geothermal. Lots of details that I won't go into tonight, but we can do a short-term loan. If you're familiar with solar, it has a federal tax credit that you can pay off, so it reduces the total amount of your loan. Let me move this here so I can see what's behind my screen. We've got special rates for Montgomery County residents again. Some people get offers from solar installers and they can see maybe a lower APR. The second bullet there says there's no large dealer charges. So a lot of times if you go to another lender, they add a dealer charge on and it lowers the APR down. I'm happy to talk more about it later, but it actually is a little bit of a better deal with this program. And you can own your own solar system and get the incentives. So I love to talk about solar. I also come from the solar industry. And let's see if I can go to the next one. Oh, in partnership with Joelle and Interfaith Power and Light, we've been helping now more than 27 faith communities in the area. We're also helping the Sandy Spring Museum look at solar. We do commercial solar financing as well. So beautiful map here. And this is the project I was telling you about. This is community solar at Paddington Square. And it's enough solar to help 91 households, a third of which are low and moderate income households. And for those folks that are low and moderate income, they don't pay anything for their community solar subscription, which is great. So if you want to know anything more about that, I have the info here, but you can send me a message if you like, and we can talk a little bit more about how that works. Some people want to know how it works if I already have a third-party provider. Can I get community solar? Yes. I already have solar panels on my house, but they don't produce all the electricity that I need. Can I get community solar? Yes. You can do all three together. They all work sort of bumper to bumper renewable energy for you. So there's my contact information. And let me jump out of here and see if anybody has any questions.
Thank you so much, Cindy. I think one of the reasons why we wanted to have you here to represent Montgomery County Green Bank is because we're talking about climate change, and a lot of the times people feel really overwhelmed and they feel really just like, I don't know what to do. And so we wanted to make sure people, had resources if they wanted to take those, actionable steps in changing their home and moving away from natural gas. So I thank you so much for being here and giving this presentation. I want to thank all of our speakers. We are over time, but if people want to stay and ask Cindy a question, she will be here and I will hang out for a little bit. But other than that, I want to thank all of our speakers for joining us today. I certainly learned a lot from you all and a lot about the projects that are happening in our area very locally and how they can impact, all of us on a more, national level. So thank you all. And I hope you all enjoyed tonight's program. Look out for History Happy Hour next month with Phil Wiggins. We're going to be talking about the history of blues. So it's going to be different, but just as riveting. So come back, join us, and I will see you next month.
Leslie, thank you so much for having me. Joelle just put a link in the chat. If you'd like to follow up on anything that we talked about, just click on that. It's a really quick Google form. And then we can connect you to whatever you need if you're looking for more information. Thanks.
Rebecca, I'm curious about your continuing to use the term natural gas in your own reporting. And if you've thought
Yeah, I'm actually right now trying to figure that out because I'm working on a story where I look at that history and I realize I can't actually use that in my own reporting going forward. In the past, I've continued to use it partly just that's what people know. And I've always tried to be precise in what the impacts are. Now I am rethinking that, but it's still a challenge, communications wise, because you want to use language people understand. But I think I'm leaning towards methane gas and maybe once using natural gas and saying this is methane gas. I've heard other alternatives like fracked gas, fossil gas. There's various permutations of that. I will explore this more in my story, but the research on whether that is the best communications phrase is a bit split. There was an interesting Yale study on how fracked gas and fossil gas can actually make Republicans more view it more favorably. So I guess it depends what your audience is. So yeah, basically the whole thing's complicated. I have polled kind of informally people in the climate community and it actually, no one can agree what they should be using. I've just heard various options. So I think I'll be try to be using methane gas going forward. Do you have a favorite phrase?
Yeah, our organization, reading that same research, decided about a year ago to consistently say methane or methane gas. And we usually do say what you might call natural gas just once so everyone knows what we're talking about, and then we don't use it again. But it does raise for me this, there are words that we use to talk about bad things that have very positive connotations. And I do think that's operating unconsciously for people. I don't use the word greenhouse gases because I think that those are both things that feel sort of inert and or greenhouses are a nice thing. I talk about climate pollution, heat trapping, climate pollution. All of those words are things that I think are more intuitive to people. The other one is just warming. The idea of a person who's warm is a nice person, so I just, talk about a damaged climate, a broken climate. But I do think a lot about if I'm trying to convey that something is bad, using words that people just intuitively will have bad associations with and not warm or good ones, because like I think like a word like natural undermines our purpose. So
Oh, that was a great question. Thank you so much for asking that. That's actually something I would not have considered. But I'm going to thank all of you again. Thank you so much for posting those links in the chat. If people want to know more, they can follow there. But I think we're going to officially close the event. Thank you all so much for coming, and have a great night.
thanks
you.
all. This was awesome.